My husband always treated me like the failure. After I earned a full scholarship to Harvard Law, on my graduation day, my father announced I'd inherit everything: our family's $57 million company, a brand new Mercedes, and our $7 million mansion in New York. I stayed quiet in the back until a stranger walked in, handed me an envelope, and whispered, "It's time to show them who the real loser is." My father wasn't supposed to be at the Harrison Charity Gala. Nathan had specifically told security that Daniel Morrison wasn't on the guest list. Yet there he stood at the microphone, holding an envelope that would destroy 7 years of carefully constructed lies. Before you celebrate the Harrison family's achievements, my father announced to 500 of New York's elite, "Let me tell you about Catherine Morrison." Yes, Morrison, not Harrison, who earned a full scholarship to Harvard Law while her husband told everyone she was a failure. The ballroom froze. Champagne flutes stopped midway to lips. Nathan's hand gripped my wrist so hard I knew there would be bruises tomorrow. His face cycled through confusion, rage, and something that looked like fear. I sat at table 17, the one pushed against the service corridor where Nathan always positioned me at these events, far enough from the main action that I couldn't embarrass him with my supposed inadequacies. But now, every eye in the room had found me. Before we continue, if you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their background or education, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps these important stories reach those who need them. 6 hours earlier, I had been in our brownstone kitchen, preparing Nathan's breakfast with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned that deviation meant conflict: egg whites with truffle oil, whole grain toast cut diagonally, orange juice with exactly 3 ice cubes. The Yale reunion invitation sat on the counter, Nathan's sticky note attached, "Don't embarrass me this time." Last year's reunion remained a catalogue of failures he still recited: the wrong fork at dinner, my community college mentioned, the way I had smiled too much at the bartender. I had tucked my Harvard Law textbooks deeper into my work bag, checking twice that the zipper was fully closed. Nathan monitored everything: bank statements, credit card charges, even the mileage on my car. But he hadn't thought to check the storage unit I rented under my maiden name, where I kept my study materials and the laptop I had bought with cash saved from skipping lunches for 6 months. At work, Maria had noticed the crackers again. She always noticed. The medical billing office where we both worked wasn't glamorous, but it was mine: 8 hours where Nathan couldn't reach me, couldn't correct my posture or my pronunciation or my opinions. Maria slid half her sandwich across the breakroom table without comment. She knew about Nathan's financial audits every Sunday night, the spreadsheets where I had to account for every penny while he drank scotch that cost more than my weekly salary. "Tonight's the gala?" Maria had asked quietly. I had nodded, already dreading it. The Harrison Foundation Charity Gala was Nathan's favorite stage, where he could display his philanthropy and his connections while I served as the cautionary tale, the charity case he had married, proof of his generous nature. His mother, Patricia, would be there, ready with her backhanded compliments. His sister, Margaret, would whisper to her friends while glancing at my dress, the same black one I had worn to every Harrison event for 3 years. The afternoon had crawled by. Each medical claim I processed felt like another bar in the prison Nathan had built around me with his constant diminishment: 7 years of being told I wasn't smart enough, polished enough, bred enough for the Harrison world. 7 years of shrinking myself to fit the narrow space he allowed me to occupy. When I got home, Nathan was already in his study on a conference call. His voice carried through the walls, confident, commanding, the voice of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. I stood in our bedroom, looking at the black dress hanging in the closet. The hem needed mending again. The fabric was wearing thin at the seams, but it was the only thing Patricia hadn't openly mocked, calling it appropriate for Catherine's position. I had been sewing the hem when I heard Nathan end his call and dial another number. "Make sure security has the list," he said. "Daniel Morrison is explicitly excluded. I don't need Catherine's father making some scene about his little tech company. The man doesn't understand proper society." My needle had paused mid-stitch. My father had sold his tech company 3 months ago for $57 million. Nathan didn't know. I had been very careful that Nathan didn't know, just like he didn't know about Harvard, about the scholarship, about the late-night study sessions in a 24-hour diner across town where I memorized case law and wrote papers on justice while he slept peacefully in our bed. The ride to the gala had been typical. Nathan drove his BMW while lecturing me on appropriate conversation topics. Don't mention your job. If someone asks, you're between positions. Don't discuss politics, you don't understand the nuances. And please, Catherine, try not to look so desperate when you smile. It's unseemly. I had stared out the window at Manhattan rushing by, counting down the months. 6 more months until 7 years, 6 more months until the prenup's most restrictive clauses expired. I had been doing this calculation daily, sometimes hourly, like a prisoner marking time. The Hamptons estate glowed with wealth, every surface designed to remind guests of the Harrison family's superiority. Nathan had immediately abandoned me at the entrance, joining his Yale friends at the bar while I found my place at table 17, always table 17. Always by the service door, always alone except for whichever elderly donor needed a place to rest their feet. I had been sitting there, sipping water and watching Nathan perform his success, when the impossible happened. My father walked onto the stage, Daniel Morrison in his simple suit that he'd probably owned for a decade, standing among people who spent more on a watch than he had on his car. But he stood there with the confidence of someone who had built something real, something earned. And then he spoke, my name, my real name, Catherine Morrison. The world tilted. Nathan's carefully constructed narrative, 7 years of systematic diminishment, 7 years of being called a failure, crumbled with a single sentence, Harvard Law, full scholarship. The words echoed through the ballroom like an accusation. Nathan's grip on my wrist loosened as security moved toward the stage, their earpieces crackling with urgent commands. The ballroom erupted in whispers, 500 people processing what my father had just revealed, Harvard Law, full scholarship. The words hung in the air like an indictment of everything the Harrisons had said about me for 7 years. Patricia Harrison rose from her seat at the head table, her face a mask of controlled fury. She moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of someone who had weathered social scandals before, though probably never one quite like this. Her diamonds caught the light as she gestured sharply to security, trying to regain control of her carefully orchestrated evening. I remembered our arrival 3 hours earlier, sitting in Nathan's BMW as we approached the estate. The dashboard had lit up with a text from Veronica, 3 heart emojis followed by, missing you already. Nathan had swiped it away without even trying to hide it, his eyes never leaving the road as he continued his pre-gala lecture. Remember, if anyone asks about your career, you're exploring options. Don't mention that medical billing office, it's embarrassing. And if the conversation turns to current events, just smile and redirect. You don't have the background to contribute meaningfully. His words had washed over me like they always did, each one carefully chosen to remind me of my place. The prenup sat between us like a third passenger, invisible but ever present. 6 more months, he had reminded me just that morning, casual but pointed. It would be such a shame if you threw away 7 years over something trivial, he had said, watching me organize his vitamins. Especially when you'd leave with nothing. The receiving line at the gala entrance had been its own special form of torture. Patricia had positioned herself at the door like a general reviewing troops. Her cheek kisses were distributed according to a complex hierarchy only she fully understood. Senators received genuine warmth, CEOs got professional courtesy. When she reached me, her lips barely graced the air beside my face. And this is Nathan's wife, she had told the mayor's wife, her pause before the word wife stretching just long enough to be insulting. She's between careers at the moment. The mayor's wife, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, had looked at me with unmistakable pity. Oh, how nice, taking time to find yourself. Nathan had laughed, that bright, false sound he deployed at these events. Catherine's still figuring things out, aren't you, darling? His hand on my lower back had pressed just hard enough to be a warning. Margaret Harrison had appeared then, Nathan's younger sister, all sharp angles and sharper tongue. "Catherine, you wore the black dress again. How consistent of you." Her friends had tittered behind their champagne flutes, a chorus of privileged amusement. I had made my way to table 17 after that, my designated spot at every Harrison event. The place card had my name written in elegant calligraphy, positioned at the table nearest the kitchen doors, where the servers brushed past constantly, their trays clattering. The elderly gentleman beside me, Mr. Worthington, had fallen asleep before the appetizers arrived, his gentle snoring the only conversation at our exile table. From that vantage point, I had watched Nathan work the room. He moved between groups with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his welcome anywhere. At the head table, surrounded by investment bankers and hedge fund managers, he had launched into what I recognized as his favorite story, the one about his wife's attempt to understand cryptocurrency at a dinner party. His hands moved in familiar patterns, mimicking my supposed confusion, my adorable incompetence. The laughter that followed had carried across the ballroom, each chuckle another small cut. Derek Chin, Nathan's Yale roommate, had been particularly amused. "God, Nathan, where did you find her? It's like Pretty Woman, except Julia Roberts never quite figures out which fork to use." "The rescue mission continues," Nathan had replied, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Some projects take longer than others." I had been staring at my untouched salad, practicing the breathing exercises my therapist had taught me before Nathan found out about the sessions and canceled them, when movement near the service door caught my eye. Through the narrow window, I saw him, my father, Daniel Morrison, wearing the same gray suit he had worn to my college graduation, arguing with two security guards. His work boots, the ones he refused to replace despite having sold his company, stood in stark contrast to the marble floor. The envelope in his hand looked official, legal, important. One security guard reached for it, but my father pulled it back, his voice rising just enough that I could hear fragments through the door. "My daughter, 7 years, the truth." My heart had started hammering. I hadn't seen him in 2 years, not since Nathan had orchestrated the final break. "Your family holds you back," he had said after a particularly tense Thanksgiving. "They don't understand our world. It's for your own good." He had made it sound logical, caring even. But really, he just couldn't risk them seeing what he was doing to me. The security guards had been getting more aggressive, one speaking rapidly into his earpiece while the other tried to guide my father away from the door. But Daniel Morrison had built a tech company from nothing. He had negotiated with venture capitalists and hostile boards. 2 security guards weren't going to stop him from whatever he had come here to do. That's when my father had done something unexpected. Instead of fighting through the service entrance, he had walked away. The guards had relaxed, probably reporting the situation handled. But I knew my father's tactical retreats. He wasn't giving up. He was finding another way in. 5 minutes later, he had appeared at the main entrance, not skulking or hiding, but walking straight through the front door during a shift change when one set of guards was briefing their replacements. He moved with purpose, not running, but not hesitating, heading directly for the stage. Patricia had been in the middle of introducing the evening's program when my father climbed those steps. The microphone had been live. The entire room had been watching. And then he had spoken my name, my real name, not the diminished version Nathan had created. And everything I had hidden for 6 months came spilling into the light. Now, as security finally reached the stage, my father stood his ground. He held up the envelope, and his voice carried over the chaos. 7 years of lies end tonight. 7 years of lies end tonight, my father repeated, his voice cutting through the chaos as security guards reached the stage. He held the envelope higher, and something in his stance, the set of his shoulders, the steel in his eyes, made them hesitate. This wasn't some drunk party crasher or activist with a cause. This was a father who had waited long enough. My father looked directly at Nathan, who stood frozen at the head table, his face drained of color. "Nathan Harrison, you've spent 7 years telling everyone my daughter is a failure. You've paraded her around these rooms like a rescued animal, proof of your charitable nature. His voice grew stronger with each word. But while you were playing with your daddy's trust fund, buying yachts you named after yourself, I built Morrison Industries from a garage startup into a $57 million technology empire. The ballroom seemed to inhale collectively. I saw Derek Chin's mouth fall open. Patricia Harrison's hand went to her throat, fingering her pearls like a rosary. The security guards had stopped advancing, looking between my father and Patricia for direction. Nathan finally found his voice. This is ridiculous. Daniel, you're embarrassing yourself. Security, remove this man immediately. But my father wasn't finished. He pulled papers from the envelope, each one crisp and official. Let me tell you what my daughter has been doing while you called her worthless. He held up the first document, and even from table 17, I could see the Harvard seal. Catherine applied to Harvard Law School in secret. She took the LSATs at a testing center 40 miles away so you wouldn't find out, Nathan. She studied in 24-hour diners, in library basements, in her car during lunch breaks. My hands were shaking so violently I had to press them flat against the table. Every secret I had guarded, every late-night study session, every hidden textbook, my father was laying them bare before 500 people. She didn't just get accepted, my father continued, his voice rising. She earned a full scholarship, perfect LSAT score, perfect grades while working full-time and managing a household where she was treated like staff. She graduates next week, first in her class, and not one of you knew because she was so terrified of what Nathan would do if he found out. Patricia Harrison's gasp was audible across the ballroom. Nathan's champagne glass slipped from his hand, crystal shattering against marble, golden liquid spreading like a confession across the floor. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the room silent. Whispers erupted everywhere. That's impossible, Nathan said, but his voice had lost its authority. Catherine barely graduated community college. She's not capable of what? My father interrupted. Of being brilliant? Of succeeding despite you? You've spent 7 years trying to convince her she's nothing, and still she rose. That's not weakness, Nathan. That's strength you could never understand. Movement at my table made me turn. An elegant woman in her 60s had appeared beside me, silver hair swept into a chignon, wearing a simple navy dress that somehow looked more expensive than all the designer gowns in the room. She sat down in the empty chair, her movements deliberate and calm despite the chaos around us. Catherine, she said quietly, I'm Judge Elizabeth Brennan. Your father asked me to give you this when the moment was right. She placed a thick envelope in front of me, heavier than paper should be. I think that moment is now. My fingers fumbled with the seal. Inside were documents that made my vision blur, bank statements showing Nathan had lost $2 million on failed investments, money he'd hidden by taking loans against properties he didn't fully own, email printouts between him and someone named Veronica, planning what they'd do with my jewelry, my grandmother's ring, after the divorce was final. But it was the transcript that stopped my heart, a recorded conversation between Nathan and his lawyer, dated last week. I read Nathan's words, Catherine is genetic trash. She was never meant for our world. The prenup ensures she gets nothing, and she's too stupid to realize I've already filed. I'll keep her thinking she has 6 more months while I move assets offshore. By the time she figures it out, there won't be anything left to divide. Judge Brennan's hand covered mine gently. Keep reading, she said. The next section detailed Nathan's fraud, false financial declarations, hidden accounts, tax evasion that went back 3 years. Each crime documented, witnessed, notarized. On stage, my father was still speaking. Tonight, my daughter inherits everything I've built, Morrison Industries, all $57 million, the Manhattan townhouse on East 78th, the entire investment portfolio I've spent 30 years growing. He looked directly at me across the ballroom. And parked outside is the Mercedes S-Class I bought for the daughter who never stopped fighting, even when the world tried to break her. Patricia Harrison's wine glass fell from nerveless fingers, Bordeaux spreading across white linen like blood across snow. Margaret Harrison was frantically typing on her phone, probably texting their family lawyers, her face pale with the realization of what this meant for the Harrison family image. Nathan had started moving toward me, his face twisted with rage. But Judge Brennan stood, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years on the bench. Mr. Harrison, I would advise you to stop right there. The prenuptial agreement you've been using to control your wife is void. That's impossible, Nathan snarled. That contract is ironclad. Contracts based on fraud are never ironclad, Judge Brennan interrupted. Your documented financial crimes, the hidden assets, the emotional abuse evidenced in these recordings, any court in New York would void this agreement. Mrs. Morrison, she emphasized my maiden name, is free to leave whenever she chooses. More importantly, given your attempted fraud, she's entitled to significantly more than the prenup would have provided. The room erupted, voices rose in shock, in gossip, in the gleeful scandal that would feed Manhattan dinner parties for months. I saw reporters pulling out phones, society matrons whispering behind their hands, business partners of Nathan's backing away like fraud might be contagious. Nathan's Yale friends were no longer laughing. Derek Chin had actually stepped behind a pillar, distancing himself from the explosion. The investment bankers at the head table were having hushed, urgent conversations, probably calculating their exposure to Nathan's failed investments. Margaret Harrison made one last desperate attempt. This is entrapment. You can't just, I can provide evidence of everything, my father said calmly. Every document authenticated, every recording legally obtained. Your brother built his own trap, Margaret. All we did was let him fall into it. I stood up from table 17 on legs that felt like water, holding the envelope full of evidence that changed everything. 7 years of being diminished, of being told I was nothing, and all along I had been becoming everything Nathan said I couldn't be. The envelope's weight in my hands anchored me to reality as I pushed back my chair from table 17. The screech of metal against marble cut through the ballroom's chaos, and suddenly 500 pairs of eyes locked onto me. My second-hand black dress, the one I'd worn to every Harrison event for 3 years, suddenly felt different against my skin, not shabby or inadequate, but like armor I'd been forging without realizing it. Each thread strengthened by every insult I'd endured. The path to the stage stretched before me, 40 feet that might as well have been 40 miles. Guests pulled back as I moved forward, creating a corridor through designer gowns and bespoke suits. I heard someone whisper, "Is that really her? The failure?" Another voice responded, "Apparently not." Nathan lunged from his position near the head table, his face contorted with desperation. His fingers caught my wrist, the same grip he'd used 1,000 times to steer me where he wanted me to go, to position me like a prop in his perfect life. "We need to talk about this privately," he hissed, his breath hot against my ear. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're doing." I stopped walking but didn't turn to face him. The entire ballroom held its breath. "You don't get to touch me anymore," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. I pulled my arm free with a motion that came from somewhere deeper than thought, from 7 years of suppressed autonomy finally breaking surface. Nathan's hand hung in the air where my wrist had been, and I saw the exact moment he realized he'd lost control. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Behind him, Derek Chin had his phone out, recording everything. The Yale Brotherhood was documenting their friend's downfall. As I continued toward the stage, movement in the crowd caught my eye. There, standing between 2 senators' wives, was Maria from the medical billing office, my Maria, who'd shared her lunch when I couldn't afford my own, who'd held my hand under break-room tables while I cried about Nathan's latest cruelty. She stood there in a simple blue dress I recognized from Target, her phone raised and recording, tears streaming down her face. When our eyes met, she gave me a thumbs up and mouthed, finally. My father's voice found me as I reached the stage steps. I invited someone who actually cares about you, sweetheart. Someone who's seen the truth all along. Maria's presence changed everything. Among 500 faces that had watched my humiliation for years, there was one person who had seen me, really seen me, not as Nathan's disappointing wife or Patricia's embarrassing daughter-in-law, but as Catherine. Just Catherine. Judge Brennan helped me up the final steps to the podium. The microphone weighted like a weapon I'd never known I could wield. I pulled out the first email from the envelope, my hands steadier than they'd been in years. "I'm going to read you something," I said into the microphone. My voice echoed through the ballroom, and I barely recognized it as my own. "This is an email Nathan sent to Derek Chin last month." Derek's face went white. He lowered his phone, suddenly wishing he could disappear into the marble floor. I read Nathan's words slowly, letting each one land like a verdict. "Catherine is proof that you can't polish trash, but she's useful for now. She cooks, cleans, and asks for nothing. The prenup ensures she'll leave with nothing, and she's too broken down to realize she could fight it. Best investment I ever made, a living servant who thinks she's a wife." The ballroom erupted, not in laughter this time, but in genuine shock. I saw Nathan's business partners exchanging glances, saw them pulling out phones, probably checking contracts and partnerships. One man, a banker named Harrison Wells, who'd laughed at Nathan's stories about my incompetence just an hour ago, was already heading for the exit. "There's more," I continued, pulling out another email. "This one's to his attorney, sent 3 days ago, move the offshore accounts timeline up. Catherine's getting suspicious. If she finds out about Veronica or the hidden assets, we need everything transferred before she can file." Patricia Harrison stood up from the head table. "This is slander. You can't prove." Judge Brennan stepped to the microphone beside me. "Mrs. Harrison, I've authenticated every document. Moreover, the prenuptial agreement your son forced Catherine to sign contains provisions that violate New York state law." She pulled out a copy of the prenup, certain sections highlighted in yellow. Article 7, Section 3 states that even in cases of documented physical abuse, Catherine would forfeit all marital assets. Article 9 invalidates any claim she might have, even if Nathan committed fraud. These clauses are unconscionable and void as a matter of law. Margaret Harrison shot up from her seat. "Our lawyers will fight this." "You can't just, your lawyers," Judge Brennan interrupted calmly, "are welcome to review my filing with the court this afternoon. Any attempts to intimidate Mrs. Morrison or interfere with these proceedings will be considered witness tampering and obstruction of justice. I'd encourage you to remain silent." Margaret's mouth snapped shut. I saw her fingers flying across her phone screen, probably texting the family lawyers, but her face had gone pale. She knew what this meant. The Harrison family image, built on generations of calculated superiority, was crumbling in real time. I found Nathan's eyes in the crowd. He stood frozen between tables, isolated in a circle of empty space as guests backed away from him like his disgrace might be contagious. "You spent 7 years telling me I was nothing," I said directly to him, my voice steady. "You made me document every penny I spent while you lost millions on failed investments. You made me believe I was too stupid for your world while I was earning perfect scores at Harvard Law. You told everyone I was a failure while I was graduating first in my class." The next document in the envelope was a bank statement. $2 million, Nathan. That's what you lost last year alone, hidden across 14 different investment accounts you didn't think I'd find. You borrowed against properties you don't fully own, committed tax fraud to hide the losses, and all while telling me I couldn't be trusted with the grocery money. Someone in the crowd gasped. Might have been Patricia, might have been anyone. The sound rippled through the ballroom like dominoes falling, each person reassessing what they thought they knew about the Harrison family fortune. Maria was still recording, still crying, still standing witness to my truth. Behind her, I noticed other phones raised, other recordings being made. By morning, this would be everywhere. The carefully constructed image Nathan had spent years building was being demolished in real time, not by my father's money or Judge Brennan's legal expertise, but by his own words, his own cruelty, his own arrogance in believing I'd never fight back. The ballroom had become a theater of Nathan's destruction, and he seemed determined to be both director and star of his own downfall. As I stood at the podium with his financial crimes laid bare before 500 witnesses, Nathan pushed through the crowd, his face flushed and wild. "Those documents are fabricated," he shouted, his voice cracking on the last word. "Catherine doesn't understand complex financial instruments. She's too stupid to comprehend what she's looking at. These are legitimate tax strategies that someone like her could never grasp." I held up another email from the envelope, this one dated 6 months ago. "Then perhaps you can explain this message to your accountant, where you write, need to hide the Singapore losses before year-end. Create shell invoices if necessary. Catherine must not find out about the extent of the damage." The Yale contingent began their retreat. Derek Chin was already at the ballroom doors, phone pressed to his ear. Another classmate, James Whitfield, suddenly remembered he had an early flight. One by one, Nathan's brotherhood abandoned him, their Italian leather shoes clicking rapidly across marble as they fled association with fraud. Patricia Harrison remained frozen at the head table, her face a mask of disbelief as she watched her son rage against evidence he couldn't refute. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white against the burgundy tablecloth, as if holding on might stop her world from tilting. "This is theft," Nathan continued, spittle flying from his lips. "That money is mine, from my family, my inheritance." "The money you lost belonged to investors," Judge Brennan interrupted calmly, "some of whom are in this room tonight." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw several men in expensive suits pulling out phones, their faces darkening as they presumably checked their portfolios. Nathan had been playing with other people's money, not just his family's fortune. Movement near the exit caught my attention. A woman in a red dress had stood up from table 12, her blonde hair catching the light as she turned toward the stage. Veronica, Nathan's mistress, the one whose heart emojis had popped up on his phone throughout our marriage. She stood there for a moment, surveying the wreckage, then spoke in a voice that carried across the ballroom. "He promised me her jewelry," Veronica announced, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. "Said Catherine's grandmother's diamonds would look better on someone who appreciated them. Told me I could have the brownstone too, once she was gone by Christmas." The words should have hurt, but instead, I felt a strange lightness. Every suspicious late night, every weekend conference, every time Nathan had made me feel paranoid for questioning his absences, I had been right all along. The relief of validation outweighed the sting of betrayal. "Veronica, shut your mouth," Nathan roared, but she was already walking out, her heels clicking a staccato farewell. "He said you were too damaged to leave," she added over her shoulder. "Said he'd broken you down so thoroughly you'd never have the courage to walk away." The doors closed behind her with a definitive thud. Margaret Harrison chose that moment to make her move. She charged toward the stage, her designer gown hiking up as she took the steps 2 at a time. "This is enough," she shrieked, reaching for the microphone. "Catherine, you ungrateful little nobody. We welcomed you into our family, and this is how you repay us?" I stepped back, letting her grab the microphone. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people reveal themselves. "Those investment losses were supposed to be confidential," Margaret continued, her face red with fury. "The board wasn't supposed to know about the Singapore accounts or the Caribbean holdings." She stopped mid-sentence, realizing what she'd just admitted. Judge Brennan was already writing in her legal pad, documenting Margaret's confession that she knew about Nathan's fraudulent activities. "Miss Harrison," Judge Brennan said quietly, "you've just admitted to knowledge of securities fraud. I suggest you stop talking and contact your attorney." Margaret's face went from red to white in seconds. She backed away from the microphone, nearly tripping over her gown as she stumbled down the stairs. Her phone was out before she reached the floor, fingers fumbling as she presumably called the family lawyer. Patricia Harrison finally found her voice, rising from her chair with the imperious bearing of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. "Enough of this circus," she declared, her voice carrying the authority of old money and older prejudices. "Catherine was nothing before us. Nothing. We took pity on her, gave her a life she could never have achieved alone. We tried to elevate her, to teach her, to make her worthy of the Harrison name." Judge Brennan raised her phone, recording Patricia's words. "Please continue, Mrs. Harrison. This is excellent evidence of the hostile environment my client endured." But Patricia was beyond stopping, her composure finally cracking after watching her son's empire crumble. "We had a plan to fix her. Nathan was doing important work, breaking down her ridiculous middle-class pretensions, teaching her how to be grateful for what she'd been given. Every dinner, every event, every interaction was designed to show her what she really was, a charity case who should thank us for tolerating her presence." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, trays forgotten as they witnessed Patricia Harrison confessing to 7 years of coordinated psychological abuse. "We all knew she wasn't good enough," Patricia continued, gesturing wildly at the crowd. "You all knew it, too. You laughed at our jokes about her failures. You whispered about her second-hand clothes. You understood that she was Nathan's burden to bear. And now she stands there, pretending to be something she's not, destroying a family that showed her nothing but generosity." My father stepped forward from the side of the stage. "Generosity?" His voice was quiet but dangerous. "You systematically destroyed my daughter's self-worth while she earned a Harvard law degree. That's not generosity, Patricia. That's cruelty dressed up in designer clothing." The room's energy had shifted completely. Where there had been shock and scandal, now there was something else, disgust. The elite of New York society were seeing the Harrisons for what they really were, and they were already calculating their distance from the fallout. Nathan made one last desperate attempt, his voice breaking as he shouted, "None of this changes what she is. She's still nobody. Still worthless, still standing," I said quietly into the microphone. "After everything you did, I'm still standing." The ballroom erupted, not in laughter this time, but in something else. Applause started from Maria's corner, spreading through the room as people began to understand what they'd really witnessed tonight, not just the exposure of financial fraud, but the public unraveling of a man who'd built his identity on crushing someone else's spirit. Nathan stood in the middle of the ballroom, isolated in a circle of empty space. His Yale friends gone, his mistress departed, his family's reputation in ruins. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without the armor of inherited privilege and social position. The applause continued as I stepped down from the stage, my legs trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The crowd parted again, but this time their faces held something different, respect, perhaps, or at least the recognition that I was more than they had been told to believe. As I reached the bottom step, 3 people approached me purposefully, their faces familiar but unexpected in this context. Catherine, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes, touched my arm gently. "You probably don't remember me, Linda Reeves. I was head of accounting at Harrison Industries until 2 years ago." Recognition flooded through me. Linda had been at one Harrison Company dinner, seated far from the main table like me. Nathan had introduced her dismissively as one of the numbers people before ignoring her for the rest of the evening. "I was terminated for questioning discrepancies in the quarterly reports," Linda continued, her voice steady but emotional. "The same transactions you just exposed. Nathan accused me of incompetence and had security escort me out. 23 years with the company, gone in an afternoon." Behind Linda stood 2 men I vaguely recognized from Nathan's office. The younger one, Thomas Chin, had been an analyst Nathan particularly enjoyed humiliating during meetings. The older, Robert Ketz, had run the Singapore office before it mysteriously closed. "We all saw irregularities," Thomas said quietly. "When we raised concerns, Nathan destroyed us professionally. Blacklisted Robert from every firm in the city. spread rumors about my work ethic. Linda couldn't get another position for 18 months. Robert stepped forward, his weathered face serious. We've been documenting everything, Catherine, keeping records, gathering evidence. We just never had the platform or credibility to expose it. But now, with what you've revealed tonight, our testimony could help ensure Nathan faces real consequences. Linda's hand squeezed mine, and her next words shattered the composure I had maintained throughout this entire ordeal. We all knew how he treated you, Catherine. Every company event, every time you visited the office, we saw it, the way he dismissed you, belittled you, made you small. I'm so sorry none of us spoke up sooner. We were all too afraid of losing our jobs, our reputations. We failed you. The tears came then, hot and sudden. 7 years of suppressed emotion breaking through the dam I had built to survive. Linda pulled me into an embrace, and I sobbed against her shoulder while 500 of New York's elite watched. I didn't care anymore about appearances or propriety. These 3 strangers had seen my pain when the people who claimed to love me had inflicted it. Through my tears, I felt familiar arms wrap around me from behind. My father's voice, steady and warm, whispered in my ear, "I've got you, sweetheart. Let it out. You've been strong for so long." I turned in his arms, burying my face against his chest the way I had as a child when the world felt too big and frightening. His suit smelled of the same aftershave he had worn my entire life, a constant in a world that had tried to reshape me into something I wasn't. "You never needed their approval," he murmured, stroking my hair while the ballroom watched. "Not Nathan's, not Patricia's, not any of these people's. You are always enough, Catherine. More than enough. I should have fought harder to stay in your life. I should have pushed back when Nathan isolated you." This embrace felt different from any touch I had experienced in 7 years. Nathan's hands had always been performative, positioning me for photos, steering me through crowds, marking possession, or they had been controlling, gripping too tight, holding me in place. But never comforting, never safe, never home. Maria appeared at my side, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and joined our embrace. Here, in this ballroom full of millionaires and power brokers, the people who truly cared about me formed a protective circle. Linda, Thomas, and Robert stood nearby, creating a buffer between us and the gawking crowd. From across the room, I noticed the head caterer, Antoine, directing his staff with pointed precision. Nathan's table, where he stood, isolated and rage-filled, had been cleared of everything, wine, water, even bread. Meanwhile, a server appeared at my elbow with a fresh glass of champagne and a small plate of canapés I hadn't ordered. One caught my eye and winked. Earlier that evening, I had witnessed Nathan berating him about the champagne selection, calling him incompetent and threatening to ensure he never worked another society event. The staff had heard it all, had watched Nathan's cruelty for years, and now they were choosing sides in the smallest but most meaningful ways. Judge Brennan approached our group, waiting patiently until I had composed myself enough to acknowledge her. When I finally met her eyes, she pulled me slightly aside, her voice low and intense. "Catherine, I need to tell you something," she began, her professional demeanor softening. 40 years ago, I was you, married to a man who made me feel worthless, who convinced me I was nothing without him. The difference is I didn't have a father brave enough to storm a ballroom. I didn't have evidence of fraud to void a prenup. I stayed. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I stayed for 23 years until James died of a heart attack at his desk, still controlling me from beyond the grave through the will he'd crafted. 23 years of my life disappeared into his ego. I went to law school at 51, became a judge at 60, but I'll never get those decades back. She gripped my hands with surprising strength. "You're 30 years old, Catherine. You're brilliant, accomplished, and about to graduate from Harvard Law. You have your whole life ahead of you, and you're free. Do you understand what a gift that is? You're braver at 30 than I was at 50. Her words hit me with physical force. Around us, the gala continued its chaotic unraveling. security guards were escorting Patricia and Margaret Harrison out while they shouted about lawsuits. Business associates of Nathan's huddled in corners, their phones pressed to their ears as they presumably tried to distance themselves from the scandal. But in my small circle of unexpected allies, time seemed to pause. "Don't waste another minute feeling guilty for saving yourself," Judge Brennan continued. "Not 1 minute. Men like Nathan, families like the Harrisons, they count on our guilt, our need to be polite, to be understanding. They weaponize our empathy against us. But tonight, you turned their weapons back on them. That takes courage most people never find." Judge Brennan's words still echoed in my mind as the ballroom descended into controlled chaos around us. Security guards were attempting to restore order while guests either fled the scandal or pressed closer to witness more drama. In the midst of it all, I noticed Nathan had disappeared from his isolated spot near the abandoned head table. "Where did he go?" Maria asked, scanning the crowd nervously. Before anyone could answer, a server approached our group. "Mrs. Harrison," he said quietly, and I almost corrected him before realizing old habits die hard. "Your husband went toward the library." He seemed agitated. My father stepped forward protectively, but I placed a hand on his arm. "I need to face him one more time." "Alone?" "Absolutely not," my father said firmly. "Catherine, he's desperate and dangerous. Maria and security can wait outside the door," I said, pulling out my phone and starting the voice recording app. "I need him to say what he really thinks when there's no audience. I need that closure." Judge Brennan nodded slowly. "Get him on record. Anything he says now could be crucial for the divorce proceedings." The library sat at the far end of the estate's east wing, its mahogany doors closed but not locked. I could hear Nathan inside, glass clinking as he poured himself something from the bar. Maria positioned herself in the hallway with 3 security guards, all of them recording on their phones as I pushed open the door. Nathan stood by the window, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his audience and armor of superiority. When he turned to face me, his eyes held a wild desperation I'd never seen before. "Catherine," he said, his voice attempting charm but landing somewhere closer to pleading, "we can fix this. All of it. Just you and me. We can make this go away." I stayed near the door, my phone recording in my hand. "There's nothing to fix, Nathan." He moved closer, switching tactics with the fluidity of someone used to manipulating situations. "I'll give you a generous settlement. 3 million tonight. All you have to do is go back out there, tell them it was a misunderstanding, and sign an NDA. We can divorce quietly in 6 months, and you'll be set for life." 3 million? I almost laughed. "You lost 2 million last year alone. Where exactly would this money come from?" His face darkened. "Don't act smart with me. You don't understand how money works at this level. I have resources you couldn't even imagine, offshore accounts in the Caymans, Switzerland, Singapore, places your little community college education never taught you about." "You mean the illegal accounts you've been hiding from the IRS?" I kept my voice steady, watching him realize he'd just confessed to tax evasion on recording. Nathan lunged forward, his hand clamping around my wrist with bruising force. "You're nothing without me," he snarled, whiskey breath hot against my face. "Nothing. I made you. I gave you a name that meant something. Without me, you're just another nobody with a worthless degree from a school that only accepted you out of pity." The pain in my wrist was sharp, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I looked him directly in the eyes. "Harvard accepted me on merit, Nathan. First in my class. And you know what's funny? You're the one who's nothing. Without your family name, without inherited money, without people you can step on, who are you?" He raised his other hand as if to strike me, but I spoke calmly and clearly. "Maria is right outside that door with 3 security guards, and they're all recording this." Nathan's hand froze midair. His face cycled through rage, fear, and finally a kind of broken desperation. He released my wrist, stumbling backward. I pulled off my wedding ring, the modest band he'd complained about for 7 years. "You spent $3,000 on this ring and acted like it was a fortune," I said, setting it on the library desk. "You spent more than that on dinner last week with Veronica." "This was never about money, Nathan. It was about respect, something you never gave and never earned." The library door burst open. Patricia Harrison stood there, her makeup smeared, her perfect composure finally shattered. She looked between Nathan and me, then rushed to her son. "Catherine, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't destroy us. The family name, the company, everything we've built, everything you've stolen, you mean?" I kept recording, watching Patricia's face as she realized the trap she was walking into. "We didn't steal anything. We protected Nathan from himself. When he started losing money, we covered it with funds from his trust. When those ran out, we borrowed against properties. We kept up appearances because that's what families like ours do. We protect each other." "You mean you lie for each other," I said quietly. "Generation after generation, covering failures with fraud, building a dynasty on deception." Patricia's confession tumbled out, years of secrets spilling like wine from a shattered glass. His grandfather did the same thing, lost everything in the 80s, rebuilt with questionable loans. Richard covered his father's debts with insider trading. And we covered Nathan's losses because that's what Harrisons do. We survive. Nathan grabbed his mother's arm. "Shut up. Stop talking." But Patricia was beyond stopping, her world crumbling, taking everyone down with her. "We knew about Veronica, about the hidden accounts, about the prenup violations. We knew he was planning to leave you with nothing, and we helped him structure it. All of us, Margaret, Richard, me, were all complicit." I looked at both of them, this mother and son who had made my life misery for 7 years, and felt something I hadn't expected, pity. They were prisoners of their own making, trapped in a cycle of lies that went back generations, each one covering for the last, none of them ever learning to stand on their own merit. "I have everything I need," I said, holding up my phone. "Confessions, admissions of fraud, evidence of conspiracy. Judge Brennan will have all of it by morning." I turned to leave, but Nathan's voice stopped me. "You'll regret this, Catherine. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never practice law." "Nathan," I said without turning around, "you already tried to destroy me. For 7 years, you tried, and I'm still here. You're the one who's destroyed." I walked out of the library, past Maria and the security guards who were still recording, through the ballroom where the party had essentially ended. Guests were fleeing the scandal like rats from a sinking ship. Past table 17 one last time, that place of exile that had been my assigned seat for so many humiliating evenings. My father waited at the entrance, Mercedes keys in his hand. Behind us, Nathan had followed, stumbling, shouting threats about lawsuits and revenge, his voice breaking with rage and desperation. But I didn't turn around. "The only revenge I need is living well without you," I said over my shoulder. The last image I had was in the Mercedes's rearview mirror. Nathan collapsed on the mansion's marble steps, his mother beside him, both of them finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless, to be dismissed, to be nothing in the eyes of the world they tried so hard to impress. The Mercedes pulled away from the Harrison estate as my father drove us through the night toward Manhattan. In the rearview mirror, Nathan remained collapsed on those marble steps, growing smaller until he disappeared entirely. My wrist throbbed where he had grabbed me, already bruising in the shape of his fingers, but the physical pain felt insignificant compared to the strange lightness filling my chest. 7 years of weight had been lifted in a single evening. The Manhattan townhouse stood quiet and waiting on East 78th Street. My father had arranged for Nathan's belongings to be packed during the gala, and boxes lined the entryway like soldiers standing guard, each one labeled in the moving company's efficient handwriting, N. Harrison Clothing, N. Harrison Books, N. Harrison office. An entire life reduced to cardboard and tape. I'll stay tonight, my father offered, but I shook my head. I need to do this alone. He understood, kissing my forehead before leaving me in the brownstone that had never felt like home until this moment. I walked through each room, seeing it differently now that Nathan's presence had been extracted. The study still smelled of his cologne and whiskey, but his awards and diplomas were gone from the walls, leaving clean rectangles of paint that had been protected from years of sunlight. I made coffee at 5 a.m. in a kitchen where I could finally eat without judgment, no more measuring portions to avoid Nathan's comments about my weight, no more timing my meals around his schedule. I found his sticky notes everywhere, behind the coffee maker, inside cabinet doors, tucked into drawers. Check sees spending, review sees calendar, monitor sees phone usage. Each one a small surveillance camera made of paper and ink. I gathered them methodically, these artifacts of control, and fed them to the fireplace one by one. The paper curled and blackened, 7 years of monitoring turning to ash and smoke. With each note that burned, I felt myself returning, like pieces of my identity were being restored from some hidden vault where I had locked them for safekeeping. Dawn broke through the townhouse windows as I sat in Nathan's former study, surrounded by the ghosts of his presence. But they were just ghosts now, powerless and fading. 1 week later, I stood backstage at Harvard Law School, my graduation gown perfectly pressed, my valedictorian speech typed on cards I didn't need. Through the curtain, I could see the auditorium filling with families, their cameras ready, their pride palpable. My father sat in the front row beside Maria, who had taken the day off to be here. Judge Brennan sat with them, having become something between a mentor and the mother figure Patricia Harrison had never been. When they called my name, I walked across that stage differently than I had ever walked before, not shrinking, not apologizing for my presence, not making myself smaller to avoid attention. The dean handed me my diploma, whispering, "Your story reached a lot of us, Miss Morrison. Thank you for your courage." At the podium, I looked out at hundreds of faces, my classmates, who had no idea I existed until last week when the news broke, professors, who were still processing that their top student had been hiding in plain sight, families, who had come to celebrate achievement and success. 3 years ago, I began, my voice clear and steady. I started this journey in secret, studying in basements and diners, terrified that someone would discover I was reaching for something beyond my assigned role. I was told daily that I wasn't intelligent enough, sophisticated enough, bred well enough for success. The auditorium was silent, everyone understanding the weight of what I wasn't saying directly. But here's what I learned in these halls: intelligence without empathy is just sophisticated cruelty. Power without accountability is theft wearing a three-piece suit. And success built on breaking others down isn't success at all. It's failure dressed in designer clothing. I never mentioned Nathan's name, but everyone knew. The story had spread through legal circles, through social media, through whispered conversations in law firms across the city, the Harrison heir who had lost everything in a single night to the wife he had called worthless. To my fellow graduates, I leave you with this: the law isn't just about winning cases or maximizing billable hours. It's about justice, even when, especially when, that justice is personal. It's about standing up for those whose voices have been silenced, whose worth has been questioned, whose existence has been diminished by those who confuse inheritance with achievement. The applause that followed felt different from the applause at the gala. This wasn't scandal or shock. This was recognition, respect, and something that felt like hope. 2 months later, I walked into Morrison Industries as its new CEO. The building my father had built from nothing now bore my name on the office door. My first act was implementing profit sharing for every employee. The janitor who cleaned offices at night would benefit from the company's success just as much as the executives who worked in those offices. Maria stood beside me as the new head of human resources, her desk in an office with windows, her salary triple what she had made at the medical billing company. "I still can't believe this is real," she said, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. "It's real," I assured her. "We're going to build something different here." Thomas Chin, one of the former Harrison Industries employees who had approached me at the gala, became our new CFO. Linda Reeves returned as head of accounting. Even Antoine, the caterer from the gala, was hired to manage our corporate events. Every person who had shown me kindness when I had no power now had a place in this new world we were creating. The foundation was Maria's idea, Table 17, From the Margins to the Center, a fund for women escaping financial abuse, women whose worth had been systematically destroyed by those who claimed to love them. The first scholarship recipient was a woman named Sarah, whose husband had hidden her acceptance letter to nursing school. She cried in my office as I handed her the check that would change her life. 6 months after the gala, an envelope arrived through my lawyer. Nathan's handwriting, shaky but familiar. I opened it in my office, Manhattan spread below me, my new life established and thriving. Catherine, it read, I know I have no right to contact you, but I had to try. I've lost everything. My family cut me off. The fraud charges destroyed my reputation. Veronica left the day my accounts were frozen. I'm working at my uncle's car dealership in New York, living in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking if we could start over. If I could prove I've changed. Please. I held the letter for a long moment, this artifact from a life that felt like someone else's story now. Then I filed it away, not out of cruelty, but as a reminder. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. Sometimes it's letting them live with the consequences of who they chose to be while you become everything they said you couldn't. Outside my window, Manhattan pulsed with life and possibility. Table 17 was just a memory now. But the strength I had found there, in exile, in silence, in survival, that strength had built an empire. This story of revenge and redemption kept you captivated until the very end. Hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Catherine stood at that podium, reading Nathan's own cruel emails to 500 witnesses who finally saw the truth. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this.